Hi, this is Ron Cipcic, and this is the second segment in a three-segment series on pure competition. In this particular segment, sorry about that, in this particular segment we're going to take a look at what we call an economic loss. And then we'll use this model to talk about the case when the purely competitive firm shuts down. Okay? In our first segment, we actually drew the purely competitive firm, and we showed how the purely competitive firm maximizes total profit. In this particular segment, we will actually show the purely competitive firm in a loss position, and we will show how the firm would actually operate to minimize that loss. So if you're in a profit position, you want to maximize profits. If you're in a loss position, you want to minimize the loss. Now, the model that is drawn shows that the firm cannot be profitable at any particular output rate. Notice that the ATC curve is above the demand curve at every particular price. So remember that in this model, the price comes from where? The price comes from the market. So the market determines the price. And that price comes in, the firm has no control over it. The firm does control its cost structure, so the firm can affect cost, but it cannot affect the price or the position of the demand curve. So that puts the firm in a position where it could do everything right and still be losing money. Think of a farmer. Farmers plant. They plant in the spring, they incur most of their costs in the spring and early summer, and then they're in a position where they have to wait for the crop to grow. Say we're talking corn, so in August and September the corn starts to come on. And what is the price of corn in September? Well, when we planted corn in April, we had no idea what the price of corn would be in September. So the firm that is a price taker, farmers, have very little or no control over the price side. All right, now there are some exceptions to that in farming, but we're looking at cases where there's a very large number of very small firms. Okay, so this firm is in a loss position. What should it do? Well, it should try to minimize that loss. The way it will minimize that loss is by operating where MC equals MR. So again, the firm optimizes by finding that place where MR equals MC, where those two curves intersect. That is actually an optimization point. So we're going to label that Q min. The goal here is to minimize what? The total loss. Now, we see that the price is down here. Maybe the price is, I'll say that this is $3 a bushel. The price is down here, but the average total cost is way up here. So we read up here. Now let me just use a line function here so I can get this nice and straight across here. And we can see that the average total cost is way up here. So the average total cost at Q min is well above the price. Say the average total cost is $5. So on average, it costs this producer $5 to produce units. Let me also identify a Q here. I'm going to move this diagram up just a little bit. There we go. And let's say that this quantity here is 6,000 units. Just making the numbers up as I go here. Now, you can see that this box here is the total loss box. Remember, if we take price minus ATC, multiply that amount by Q, we get the total profit or the total loss. In this case, it's going to be a loss because ATC is greater than P. So let's plug our numbers in. $3 minus what? Minus $5. Average loss of 2 times what? Times 6,000 units equals a total loss, I'll put it in brackets, of what? Of $12,000. So this is a $12,000 loss. So this firm is going to lose money no matter where it operates under these conditions. If it wants to operate and operate at a loss, and you may wonder, well, why would the firm even do that? I'll show you later that that actually a firm could be operating at a loss and it would still be wise to stay open, in that if the firm is covering its variable costs and contributing something to the recovery of its fixed cost, then it makes sense to stay open. All right, so there can be cases where the firm will offer to sell at a certain price, even though it knows it's losing money, because that price is sufficient to cover the variable costs and contribute something to the recovery of the fixed cost. Now, you might look at this and say, well, no, that the point where MC equals MR can't be optimal. That firm should really be producing out here where MC equals ATC. But notice that if the firm operates out here, let me again use my line function so I can get a nice, you can see that the box actually gets larger. Now I'll just use a different coloring scheme here. Let me get my, and you can see that the area of the box actually gets larger. So if the firm moves from Q min out here to this point where you minimize, look at this, this is where we minimize ATC. We minimize ATC there. If we move to the point where we minimize ATC, the total loss box actually gets larger. So again, the moral of the story is not to minimize ATC. The moral of the story is minimize the total loss. Minimize the total loss. And this would just get worse. If the firm produced out here, I can just illustrate this. If the firm, don't do this to your picture, but if the firm operated way out here, you can see the box just keeps getting worse. It gets bigger. Or if the firm were to operate over here, sorry about that, you would see that the box even gets bigger. So the point I'm trying to make is whether a purely competitive firm is in a profit position or in a loss position, it should operate where MC equals MR. And that's the moral of the story. Now, let's address the situation as to when a firm should actually shut down. Okay? And so I'm going to get rid of this material here, and I'm going to give us a scenario. So suppose, let me just go ahead and give you a scenario here, and then we'll actually do the calculations. So let's just write this out. When should a purely competitive firm shut down? That's the question. Well, we know that the firm would have to be what? In a loss position. So you're not going to consider shutdown if the firm's in a profit position. By the way, a loss position would be a situation where ATC is greater than P at QM. Okay, so in other words, we're doing everything we can to maximize profits, but ATC is still greater than price at Q min. The second condition takes it a step further. You would shut down only if, let's write this down, shut down only if AVC is greater than price at Q min. So you wouldn't consider shutting down if price were greater than ATC. If ATC is greater than price, you would consider shutting down. But you only shut down if AVC is greater than price at Q min. You go, now I'm confused. Okay, so let me use a numeric example and we'll illustrate this. Okay, so let me give you some data. Assume that ATC, I'll use some different numbers here, ATC equals 50. Assume that AVC equals 30. Assume that price equals 20. and assume that this is all taking place at QM, where MC equals MR, and say that this is at 8,000 units. Okay, just making the data up. And of course Qmin would be where MC equals MR. Okay? Right? Now, let's go ahead and let's run the numbers and evaluate whether this firm should stay open or shut down. So let me show you how to actually set this up. Okay? So I'm going to set up a little T account here. And we'll do our calculations. So the left side will be stay open, should the firm stay open, or the right side should be will the firm shut down. Okay, so we're going to do a little a comparison. We're going to do some analysis here. Now, if the firm stays open, what would be the calculation? Well, it's that calculation we've been doing. Price minus ATC times what? Times Q. So the price is what? The price is 20. The price is 20. ATC is what? ATC is 50. So what's the average loss? The average loss is 30 times how many units? Times 8,000 units. So we have $30 times 8,000, and that equals, let me use some red here, that would be $240,000 loss. I'll put that in brackets indicating that's a loss. So if the firm stays open, whatever the rate is here, are we talking daily, are we talking weekly, are we talking monthly, are we talking annually, this firm would lose $240,000 by staying open. Now, how do we evaluate the shutdown scenario? Well, if the firm shuts down, it loses its investment. And we're going to assume no salvage value here. In other words, that assets are going to be sold for pennies on the dollar. Actually, we'll assume they're sold for nothing. That basically when the firm goes bankrupt, it loses everything. And what is the investment? The investment is effectively total fixed cost. If you think about it, the fixed investment is the total fixed costs. In the problems we've been doing, maybe it's machinery. But we could extend the problem to buildings and other fixed assets. Okay, so these assets, let's say the company goes bankrupt, it's not able to get any salvage off them, and basically you could incorporate a salvage value in for the assets, and that would actually reduce the loss in shutting down. But we'll assume a worst case scenario here, the firm can't sell the assets for anything. All right, how do you calculate TFC? Well, we've got some data here. We know that ATC minus AVC equals AFC. We know this because we have studied cost. So 50 minus 30 means our average fixed cost is 20. And then if we take AFC and multiply it by Q, any average times Q gives you the corresponding total. Okay, so AFC times Q gives you TFC. So what do we have here? 20 times what? 20 times 8,000 equals what? That's going to equal 160. Let me move this over a little bit. 160,000. And this effectively, let me just go ahead and circle it in red. This is effectively our loss. We're going to lose that. We're going to lose that. We're going bankrupt, so we lose our fixed investment of 160,000. Now, what would it be better to do? Would it be better to stay open and lose 240,000, or would it be better to shut down and only lose 160,000? Well, here it's better to what? It's better to shut down. Why? Let's go back up and look at our rule. Why is it better to shut down in this case? Because AVC, let me use a different color here, AVC is actually greater than price, which is this rule right here. We know that ATC is greater than price. The question is what's the relationship between AVC and price? And you can make a note here, the firm is not covering its variable cost. Therefore, it can't be what? It can't be contributing anything to the recovery of fixed cost. Think about it. If my price isn't great enough to cover my variable cost, then I can contribute nothing to the recovery of fixed cost. And when I'm in that situation, it's actually better not to stay open. It's actually better to shut down. Now there are businesses. Think of retail. Think of a store like Kohl's or Macy's, and think of February. Kohl's or Macy's, if you look at their February financial statements, late January, February, March financial statements, it's likely you're going to see that first of all, those retail stores are losing money in those months because so few shoppers come in. But secondly, they're not even probably covering their variable costs at certain times of the year. In other words, they can't even generate enough sales to cover the variable inputs, the sales help and all that. You go, well, why are they even staying open? Because let's face it, Kohl's and Macy's and other department stores like that can't shut down part of the year and then reopen. They have to be open all the time if people are going to come to them during even their peak seasons. You have to believe Macy's is there if you're going to go and use it. So it isn't like Macy's opens one time of the year and then shuts down the rest of the year. So Macy's, Kohl's, department stores like that, they're profitable. That's why they're still in business. They've been profitable for a long time. They've stayed in business because they're profitable. However, this doesn't mean they're profitable every month, and it doesn't even mean that they're covering their variable costs every month. So the moral of the story is, if you're considering shutdown, it's whatever the relevant period is. And the relevant period for a retail store would be a year. If you're not covering all of your costs in a year, then you're going to consider shutting down. If you're not covering your variable costs, you will shut down. If you can cover your variable costs and contribute something to the recovery of your fixed costs, you may stay open, hoping, of course, that things improve and you can raise your prices above your cost at some point or reduce your costs below your prices. Okay, that concludes our lesson on economic loss and the case of shutdown.